Hello, my name's Stephen Billett, and I'm presenting this session on enhancing the standing of vocational education and the occupation it serves, an Australian study. What I want to argue is that assisting young people make informed choices about post-school pathways is an essential educational progress, and that is to assist them identify occupations that are of interest to them and to which they are suited. And in an era of high aspiration, this is perhaps more important than ever. And the failure to find that pathway, to find that appropriate occupational career, can lead to circuitous pathways and inappropriate choices and misalignment with job opportunities. Societal sentiments such as the low standing of vocational education and the occupation it serves are unhelpful in that decision-making process because they potentially distort it. And this influences young people's and their parents' decisions about post-school pathways, but also how governments come to view and employers come to view and society comes to view that those occupations and vocational education and training. So providing informed and impartial advice and improving the status of the diverse post-school pathways for young people seems to be an important and worthwhile educational project. So this is a global concern. For instance, in both countries with developed and developing modern industrial economies. In the United Kingdom, this concern about a lack of young people going into technical occupations is seen as a great concern, particularly ahead of and as a result of Brexit. And in Germany, Thomas Diesinger reports that the shortage of young people wanting to become apprentices is causing employers to vie for apprentices, what he refers to as the war for apprentices. And in Switzerland, it was deemed that there were too many young people engaging in degrees that had no specific employment outcomes. So here, that actually led to the enhancement of the standing of vocational education and a greater participation in vocational education, as Stalder and Nagel report. And in Korea, South Korea, a country highly dependent on its manufacturing sector, those jobs are held in low societal esteem, and that's rehearsed by parents, by teachers, etc. And the concern there is that to generate enough workforce for these industries that are central to the national economy. And in Australia, there's a concern that a preference for higher education is leading to skills shortages and then graduates who are leaving university but not having the capacities to find employment directly from their education. And these concerns, I think, are being accentuated at this current time. And that is because of geopolitical tensions, because of issues that have risen through the pandemic, there's a realization for greater national self-reliance and self-sufficiency. And this has become heightened. And this emphasizes the importance of vocational education to national, community, and personal well-being. So the importance of this educational process was first rehearsed by Dewey, who suggested that there were two educational purposes for education for occupations. The first was to assist young people identify the occupations in which they're interested and were suited to. And the second was to prepare them for those occupations. Now, I guess the consensus is that the focus has been on the second of those two goals and perhaps less emphasis on the first. And what Dewey argued was it was important that young people didn't fall into what he referred to as uncongenial callings, those that were not of interest to them, so that their work wasn't interesting and didn't meet their needs. And what we would be concerned about as a community, I suspect, is that people's occupations become their vocations. That is something which they identify with, which is important to their sense of self or subjectivity. So but this is a difficult challenge for educators and parents, because on the one hand, there's a need to encourage aspiration, to encourage young people to reach the highest educational levels they can achieve, but on the other hand, to promote informed decision-making. Hence the need for impartiality, objectivity, and also managing expectations, because in this era of high aspiration, there's a great risk that aspirations will be converted to expectations. It's been suggested that the equivalence argument is lost, that vocational education standing against other educational sectors is inevitably deemed to be lower. And this is said to occur both within schooling and post-schooling. Within schooling, that is compulsory education, the comparison between the vet stream and the academic stream, and then beyond schooling, the comparison between participation in vocational education and participation in higher education. So there's negative comparisons arise from this. So we wanted to investigate this and to see what kind of changes could be brought about. And here I'll report a study which was conducted in Queensland, my home state in Australia. And this, the key question was, what factors influence people's decisions about participation in vocational education and training to prepare for future careers? And then associated with that is, how can the status of vet be enhanced to increase the uptake by young people? There were 3 phases in this project. Firstly, we did interviews and focus groups with parents, school teachers and school students and vet students to identify their perceptions and suggestions. And we did that in both metropolitan communities, but also regional communities, that is communities outside of the metropolitan area. And we had that number of informants, students, teachers, parents, and vet teachers. Then we did a survey, which was to take the findings from those focus groups and interviews and convert it into a survey to reach out to a broader audience. And in that, we gained the following sample of school-age students, school teachers, and parents. And then in the 3rd and 4th phases, we engaged in a series of workshops, both in metropolitan and non-metropolitan communities, with people in schools, with career coordinators, vet coordinators, heads of department, to try and come up with effective strategies that could respond to the challenges and the issues which had been raised in the first 2 phases. And in the first phase, some of the findings are as follows: that school students report post-school pathways shaped largely by familiars, that is parents, teachers, and peers. Now, this is very consistent with what has been reported elsewhere, particularly in Europe, but also the indirect suggestions that come from media. But these 3 sources of influence differ in the degree by which they're authoritative, the level of influence, and the level of engagement. So on one hand, you can have a teacher who is authoritative because they're seen as being authoritative, yet not have a lot of knowledge about other options than participating in university. And then you can have others who are highly authoritative. Yet you can have individuals who are authoritative and are either able to exercise influence, such as classroom teachers, or individuals who are authoritative but are not able to influence and engage to the degree which is helpful and informative. That for school students who decided on their occupations, the differences were the schools they went to and the year level of their education. And as they became closer to leaving school, the more likely to have decided upon an occupation. However, for those young people, and not unreasonably, who at the age of 18 have remained undecided about the occupations they wish to participate in, that they're drawn to universities because of the breadth of options and also the attractiveness of universities as against vocational education institutions. The other key issue for vocational education in Australia is that all of the courses are highly occupational specific. So this is a clear barrier for those young people who haven't decided what occupation they want to participate in. And students who are undecided and do not have university entrance are therefore compromised because all the courses are occupationally specific. And the detail of this phase can be found in the chapter of this book, which has recently been published. And in the second phase, the key influences on young people's decision-making were parents, school teachers, peers, and school guidance officers. Yet that kind of advice was largely based on personal experiences and preferences in the vast majority of instances, rather than a considered and comprehensive reviews of options. And the differences in rankings, and this is interesting, in terms of desired outcomes, qualities of work, and what constitutes effective message about post-school pathways, differed between the student cohort and the adult cohort. So there was differences in perceptions between the school-age children and the adult cohort, which was teachers and parents. And teachers and parents may underestimate the influence of the classroom teacher and overestimate the role of guidance officers on decision-making. And the implications here are for what kind of messages need to be sent, and how we engage with those people who are influential. And so that is obviously parents and teachers, and processes that are used within the schools. And more detail of this survey findings is available in that chapter. Some findings which you might find of interest here. This is looking at the different sets of influences on decision making, and the influences are ranked based upon the students' rankings. And you'll see here that whereas the students, everybody sees the parents as being the first most influential source, what you'll see is that teachers are viewed second by the students, but only fifth by the teachers themselves and parents. And then you'll see that guidance officers are perceived by parents and teachers as being the second most, when students rank them as being fourth. And this is consistent with what came out of the interviews, where school guidance officers said, we don't deal with this stuff, it's not our role. And I'm one guidance officer in a school of 400 senior students. So familiars, particularly parents and school teachers, are influential in this decision making. Therefore, their engagement in any efforts to enhance the status of vocational education and the occupation it serves seems to be important. In terms of how to bring about change and how to inform young people about post-school pathways, again, there was differences in the views of the school students as opposed to teachers and parents. The first three that were ranked highly by the school students were providing personalized career information, exposure to a range of work situations, and exposure to different kinds of post-school educational destinations of different kinds. And you'll see here that there were differences in how these were ranked based upon the cohorts. The interesting thing about this list, by the way, is the first three are really within the ambit of schools to actually bring about change, to provide some kind of more personalized approach to expose and draw upon students' experience in different work situations, and also to provide access, trips to different kinds of post-schooling educational institutions. In the third and fourth phase, this involved these workshops in schools with heads of department, deputy principals, vet coordinators, senior year coordinators. And the concern here was to verify and elaborate and come up with practical strategies about engaging with young people and their parents to change their perceptions. And from this, it was suggested that often parents have a very narrow view of vet and not very knowledgeable about it. And that even when adults identified that there were highly respected vet-related jobs, they still preferred to promote university entrance. And that guidance officers, as I've mentioned, reported there's misunderstandings about their roles, and often it's about student welfare, not career planning. And that students reported that they get overwhelmed with the information, the text information that's available to them, and what they want is some means by which that information can be personalized, sifted through, and aligned with their interests and capacities. And it was suggested by one teacher, this is pretty difficult to do when you're dealing with 200 plus students. And so schools report that engagement with parents and local employees is difficult and can be unproductive, but this seems to be a key need. And it would seem that there's differences between metropolitan schools and non-metropolitan schools in terms of engagement with the community. But this is where perhaps some effort needs to be exercised. And teachers, I think, need to be more conscious. The classroom teachers who engage with students every day need to be more conscious about how they refer to post-school destinations. You know, from what the data is suggesting, this is like the hidden curriculum in action, the unintended outcomes of things that teachers say, or perhaps implicit in terms of what they say and do. And more detail of these findings can be found in that chapter of this recent publication. So the findings suggest then that there are some strategies that need to be taken to make vocational education and training to be more viewed as a viable and worthwhile post-school option. And this might arise through public education processes, give VET a fair go. This needs to be promoted by government, because if it's promoted by VET institutions, it'll be seen as mere marketing. So this is about changing a societal sentiment about VET and the occupation it serves. And then there's actions by schools to actually promote and inform and advise impartially about diverse post-school pathways. And then VET institutions offering more attractive environments, easier engagement, but also those broadly based programs which are not initially occupational specific, so that young people can perhaps engage and try different occupations or take a more general approach to their initial occupational preparation. And then there needs to be a concerted effort and leadership by government and industry sectors to promote the occupation that VET serves. And in the attached document, these strategies are elaborated. So what effective and informed and impartial advice and sources of information are helpful to assist young people's decision-making about post-school pathways? And it's important for meeting young people's needs, addressing their aspirations to realize their educational and societal and social potential, and that education provisions to ameliorate for the different kinds and levels of engagement knowledge that students are exposed to. So some students will have access through parents and other familiars with huge advantages in terms of the advice they're getting, and others won't. So there's a need, I think, for this goal, the first goal that Dewey identified, to be accentuated and engaged in the schooling process. And that advice and options for young people who are undecided need to be available across both compulsory and tertiary education, that is, education beyond schooling. And that school-based activities can assist in this process by preparing the experiences of activities that support that, which includes perhaps educating students, parents, and also the teachers that have meetings about post-school pathways. So that's the conclusion. Here is the references, and there's 2 QR codes, one to the research bulletin and one to the strategies document, which you may find helpful. I hope you've had a great conference. Apologies that I can't get there, and I hope to engage with you later. I hope you find this presentation to be of interest. Enjoy the conference, and my best wishes. All the best.